Welcome to BWI Live, 10 a.m. here on Wednesday? I almost thought it was Thursday for a second. I've been up since 6, so don't just ignore me. Welcome to the show. Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer with us today. We're going to be talking about Penn State open practice yesterday, James Franklin comments, and some of the other comments that we spoke to some of the players and coaches afterwards, give you a full breakdown of everything we saw and heard yesterday at practice. Practice number 4 was yesterday. As I said, Penn State insiders Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer with us. Fitz, how are you doing today? How's the puppy? I know you got a new puppy recently, so that's got to be a whole new level of things going on behind the scenes for you.
Puppy's going great. And by the way, telling 2 guys with 2 kids in single digits that you got up at 6, I'm sorry, it provides no clout with you whatsoever. Like that is the day. That is what happens.
Yeah.
But no, we're great. We're talking Penn State football. We had open practice last night, so we're going to get into that a little bit. Got some mailbag questions. Got a little bit of everything today. So excited for it.
Nate, how is everything going on your end?
Terrible.
How's the insider business going for basketball?
It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
Things are happening. It's what do they call it? High alert. We're head on a swivel. So
right.
Tracking Micah Shrewsbury and what he plans to do. And so if I fail to make it the whole way through this show, my apologies in advance to the loyal listeners out there. But stuff happening.
Yeah, never apologize. I consider it a true honor when we get Adam Schefter on the show. When Fitz is looking at his phone and we're getting information in live time, or if Nate is has to leave because there's breaking news, this is what we do. This is what you guys do, I should say, is that you are the people that get this information, then give it to other people. So I'm excited for that. And of course, when there is breaking news, Nate and I will break it all down here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Make sure you like the channel, you subscribe to the channel, and you like this video. Get into all of that nonsense in just a little bit. But Nate, I want to come back to you quickly here.
Yeah.
Biggest news coming out of yesterday from Tuesday night, as far as like news information, doesn't sound like injuries are going super great from what James Franklin updated us from the beginning of camp on Tuesday last week to Tuesday this week. What did he have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, he just said that he wished that more people were out there, but they're not, and they're gonna keep going, right? I mean, not that any of the absences that they have aren't important. They are. I think it's just a matter of trying to keep some perspective, right? If it was Drew Aller, again, I'll go back to it. If it was Drew Aller, it would be a different conversation, right? Like we would, it would be, the tone would pivot pretty dramatically. But to have some absences at Mike linebacker, say, or on the offensive line, right? Like I don't know that that's necessarily the worst thing in the world, and it's something that they can sustain fairly comfortably, I would say.
Some of the other stuff that happened yesterday, we got a chance to talk to Mike Yurcich, and we got, I know Fitz and I were standing there talking to Mike Yurcich. What are some of the things that stood out to you when he was talking to the media? Because he talked for I think he talked for as long as James Franklin, maybe a little bit longer. I was always intrigued by those things, but what stood out to you?
Yeah, a little more informal than the James Franklin press conference, which is good, Mike Yurcich is a little more informal than James Franklin. So we'll say that. He talked a lot about the quarterbacks, as you would naturally expect. A lot of the questions surrounding Drew Aller, Bo Perbula, and then a little bit on Jackson Smolik as well. But those guys becoming more vocal, being more natural. I think it's very important to remember we're 4 practices in to the spring right now. So not a ton has happened in terms of moving the needle. Those guys are getting settled in. He talked again about the importance of having Sean Clifford around and having the way to prepare laid out in front of those guys. And they're picking up a lot on that. But they are becoming more vocal. I think he said it like 3 times last night. Once it steps on the field, it becomes natural for those guys. And that's good. Mm-hmm. We know Bo's a very good leader, like just based off of his entire history that we know about him. Drew, I think we're going to have to see a little bit more quiet guy. Like when he got on campus, very quiet. I don't think in the sense that we talked the same about Taquan Roberson quiet, but like, it's going to take some coming out of his shell to get there. And I think he's on that track. So I don't think it's a worry for them there. Another theme that he came across, he said vision probably 8 times last night. Like it's something that's very big. We talk a lot about decision making and arm talent, accuracy and things like that. But I think vision is something that we don't really talk about when we talk about what Mike Yurcich looks for in a quarterback. That's not just seeing the defense. That's not just seeing the blackboard and things like that. I mean, it's seeing and recognizing those things that Sean Clifford was so good about. So I think those are a couple things to take away from it. He talked about Beau Pribula in the sense that he is a dual threat quarterback, but did not want to call him a dual threat quarterback. I thought that was funny. Again, the scouting report, we think we know what we're getting with Beau Pribula as he continues to improve as a passer, as a thrower. But it's just funny to see the contrasting styles there. You asked him about arm strength. He kind of because he's like, okay, I don't have to BS about personnel. I don't have to talk about this guy, because that's the thing with Mike Yurcich. You ask him about a guy, every place has competition. Every position has competition. He asked about Keandre Lambert-Smith. There's competition at why. That's how he does things. That's how he approaches things. He does not like to talk specifics, and he will not talk about a player unless he's asked specifically about that player. So when you open him up to a topic about, hey, what is arm strength? He's like, kid on Christmas morning, let's talk some X's and O's. Let's talk about the schematics of all this, because as he told you, it's not just about, just making that whipping. This is not Rookie of the Year, the movie that was probably made before you were born. The whipping motion is not everything for arm strength. It's a little bit of the process. And I think that's what really interested him.
Yeah, I see. We vibe on that level. I love talking about X's and O's because that's really what's going into a lot of these decisions is what are you trying to accomplish? And going back to talking about Beau Pribula and his scouting report, when we do these kind of general narratives about, and I think what he was pushing back on, the dual threat quarterback thing, we also have this conversation about arm strength. And you've got Drew Aller, who has clear, strong arm qualities. But I think even sometimes experts get caught up in this guy is what he is, and it's not what I want for X. But just like speed and just like strength, I believe arm strength with certain players can get better. Like even for Drew Aller, his arm strength can get better, and that's really what I was interested in. Is Beau Pribula is bigger and stronger now, so is his arm bigger and stronger? How does that process work? And the conversations I've had with quarterback experts, and one of the things that he said that was interesting is when he's talking about throwing mechanics, not trying to change those things, like working within the bounds of those things. And Brad Mandler, the quarterback coach for Drew Aller, he's not interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of the fundamentals. But when he talked about the chain of movements, the kinetic movement, throwing with your legs, the snap of the hips, making sure all those things are in tune, I think that's a really great place for a quarterback coach and an offensive coordinator to understand exactly what you need and how to help accentuate it without getting in the way. And quarterback developers are so important in football. And that trying to figure out is Mike Yurcich a guy that can develop quarterbacks to take good from great and great to elite. I think we've seen evidence that he's very good at this, and just kind of getting into his process. I was fascinated by that. I really enjoyed that conversation. The problem is, like, you ask a question and then he gives you the answer, and I just want to keep talking. I wanted to keep going with that conversation.
I was thinking there because you mentioned Brad and the quarterback coach, the personal quarterback coaches. The one thing that I caught when Mike was talking was they don't want to change too much of what they already do. So it's not like he's going in there and saying, here are the mechanics, here are the fundamentals, here's what you have to do in our system to be one of our quarterbacks. He's taking what they have already done. He's worked with Brad for a long time. He's done some really nice things and just sort of refining that. And I think that's really cool and probably really hard to do for a guy like Mike Yurcich, who's making 7 figures, as an offensive guru, as a quarterback guy, whatever, to take that from a personal quarterback coach. But that's part of the give and take. That's part of the game. And he trusts those guys. He's worked with those guys or talked with those guys a bunch. So I thought that was interesting in that you're not trying to pigeonhole and going back to something like arm strength. I mean, all of that stuff comes together, the sequencing, the posture, the platform, all that kind of stuff. It's why when Stetson Bennett is 5'11", 6 foot and has a freaking cannon. Like, it's not just that his arm is that much stronger than everybody else. It's because he has those mechanics. He does all those things right and gets the ball out there fast. So it's not, I mean, you can put Josh Allen out there at 6'5", you can put Stetson Bennett out there at 6 foot, like this is how it comes about. This is not just how far can you throw a football.
And squats are a big part of it. Like I'm just, that's why, the conversation around Bo Prabula, I hope we can have we can see more from him this year. And my hope is that, if I'm correct about this, that we're changing the conversation of he's not Trace McSorley. Fundamentally, in a lot of ways, Trace McSorley, the conversation was he is so great within the limitations of his physical frame and all the things because he didn't have the strongest arm. I think there's more there for Bo Prabula. Got some people here in the chat. And by the way, at the end of the show, we're taking BWI mailbag questions, and we need you and your help to make that section of the show sing. So if you've got a great, thoughtful question, we're talking about mechanics, we're talking about quarterback development. If you got a question about some of that stuff or maybe some other really smart football conversations you want to have, drop them in the chat. Best way to get your question noticed, and so I see it at the end of the show, is to leave a donation through the super chat function. But we'll be getting to the best questions at the end of the show, so drop those in now. Mike is on the way to a sales appointment and commenting along the way. Mike, be careful. Don't text and drive. I love the commitment, but I want you here for the next show. WK says, of course, my team's meetings start at 10, but he's still listening. So appreciate everyone's commitment here to the show. But please stay employed and stay alive so that we can have you here on the show next week. Nate, who did you talk to? We had a great conversation with Mike Yurcich. Who did you speak to and who did you listen to during the post James Franklin comments?
Yeah. So I talked to Kobe King, and he was great. He's great. He's always insightful and, just very well measured. I thought that, he talked about how much more comfortable he is. It's all stuff that you would expect, right? I mean, you get a third spring practice in, and I think it's just a more comfortable place to be. He's changed his body. I think he said that he was losing weight. He's I don't want to say thinning out. Like, I mean, he looks ridiculous. He's jacked right now. So that kind of stood out to me. I do want to touch on one thing that I don't know how much attention we've given it so far, but Keandre Lambert-Smith pointed out, right, like by James Franklin as doing really well this spring. Mm-hmm. I think is significant. Like, that was the thing that I took away from yesterday on the whole was literally Franklin turning his attention to who's the third, right? So he kind of put it out there as Keandre needs to be the guy, right? Like the guy at Penn State, the guy in the Big Ten. And I felt the tone was optimistic toward that end. Like, that's a positive, that's an important thing for Penn State football to have that. Trey Wallace was a guy who he pointed out as having taken strides and being better. And so when it shifts from that to, hey, this is like the priority now is figuring out how they're going to have a third guy. Is it going to be a rotational role? Is it going to be somebody who can separate from the pack? That caught my attention. I thought that was fairly important and a fairly significant storyline that we're going to be following, obviously all offseason, but in particular right now to get that feedback, I thought was pretty important.
And I don't think it was said in a message form either, like not sending a message to Keandre that he needs to be the number one. Like, he's done that in the past with players. And this was more like, yeah, I think he's coming along as a number one. Like, and that's a good sign, obviously still distance to go to get there, but like for him to be at that point, especially with Keandre, where consistency and confidence is so important, I think it's a very positive statement. So like he's not sitting up there being super effusive, but like he's being complimentary. And by the way, thanks for reading our notes over the weekend where we talked about Keandre Lambert-Smith. But no, this is positive steps. Yeah, that's right. This is positive steps in that room that just has so many questions.
So you mentioned over the weekend, Fitz. Just quickly before we get to some of the observations from practice yesterday, how does the calendar work? And how does this? Because James Franklin mentioned, Nate, what's going on?
No, you're a big jerk, Fitz. There was an NCAA tournament game this weekend that I was covering. So anyway, go ahead. Continue, T. Frank.
Yes. Everyone was very busy over the weekend, James Franklin included, where he mentioned that one of the comments was live practice didn't have as much physicality from the young guys because they're thinking, want to see how they do in the next live practice. So I think just for fans that don't know, Fitz, how does practice formatted and when do things start to heat up? Because he mentioned, again, another thing he talked about was, we're in installation phase right now. So when do we get kind of the meaty stuff, and when should fans go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for your insider reporting on when, we start to separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say?
Yeah, so 4 practices in so far, 2 unpadded practices last week. It's an acclimation period. Everybody does it. You have to do it. They got into it on Saturday with a little bit of scrimmaging, as James Franklin said, where he mentioned the physicality aspect of it. And then, starting tomorrow, we're in the middle third of spring practice. Like, it doesn't seem like that because so little happens in the first week of spring ball. But the way the Penn State schedule is happening, it's basically every other day. And that's, some schools take 6 weeks to get 15 practices in. That's kind of how it works out with Penn State's schedule. The blue-white game, of course, being when it is, has a big say in that. So I think we're just getting into sort of the meat of things. A lot of installations so far, a lot of bringing guys along. And when you don't have a 4-year starter at quarterback, it's going to take a little bit longer to get things in. That's not a slight on those guys. That's just natural progression. So I think we're going to start getting into a little bit more. We had some notes over the weekend, some guys that stood out, but you have to take those with the added expectation that, hey, they've only had 2 practices at this point. How much can guys do? At the same time, check those notes out. But that's kind of where we're at in this schedule. You get into it, and the weekends are certainly important because that's when they like to do their scrimmaging. That's when they like to have that's when they have their full squad on hand and can really go after it. We get Tuesday nights now. They kind of switched it up. It used to be Wednesday nights. We get Tuesday nights now. So it's basically a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday situation at this point. Saturdays, you get the scrimmaging, maybe get in Beaver Stadium a little bit. You get the more recruits on hand. There's recruits on hand for pretty much every practice now, but the big group of recruits that we talked about on the show the other day with Ryan Snyder, that's where you get them on Saturday. So just getting into that middle third, and that's when you get a chance to sort of separate some guys and pull out a little bit more in terms of standouts.
We'll be getting to what we saw at that Tuesday practice here in just a second, but first, more insight, more ways to consume Blue White Illustrated. The magazine is coming out on Friday, so check that out wherever you get your magazines, newsstands. You can go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, sign up for the magazine as well, I think. I don't know exactly that there, but BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is where you get the information. Sign up now. You just missed our spring deal. As of today, that ended where you could get 4 months for $10. So it's back to if you want to sign up now, and it's $29.99 until the start of the season. Still a great deal. But here's what I'm suggesting to you. Yes, that's a great deal. But if you sign up for a year, then you're locked in and you're getting all the information, all the insight from now until next spring. So no matter how you sign up, you're still getting a great value from Blue White Illustrated. And of course, I want to make sure that we represent here our show sponsor, the people that help us make this live show go at 10 a.m., and that, of course, is Rogue Shop. Rogue Shop is a husband and wife outfit. Mr. Rogue and Shar, craft cannabis farmers who specialize in small batch, sustainable plant medicine with a holistic type of small business. They're from Wisconsin. They have a small indoor grow where they manufacture and they work to educate the population on THC and THC-based medicine and to educate and inform. Like, this is the part of the conversation I had with them myself was I didn't know anything about THC. I was not somebody who consumed it previously, legally or illegally. So I had no idea what it could do for you. So if you want to learn more, rogueshop.com. Shar is there. She answers your questions in the chat. They can help direct you to the medicine that you need to help you with anxiety, sleep, any other areas that THC and CBD have been shown to help support your journey towards wellness. That's another really important thing. Is it's not about just having fun and goofing around. It's about making your life noticeably better. Rogueshop.com. I personally have used the Delta 9 gummies to help me sleep at night. I ran out of them and I ordered more, and I will not I'll make sure that I don't run out ever again, because man, those things are super helpful. We saw practice yesterday. Nate, I'll come back to you. You spent some time with the offense. The receivers, you and I were talking, pretty interesting. So what did you see from Marcus Higgins and how he was working with this group of receivers?
Yeah, I thought, and I don't want to like over stress this, but I just thought he was extremely physical. He was engaged, and like it was less of a Taylor Stubblefield had a quieter demeanor, I guess is how I would put it. Marcus was just like much more engaged and not only explaining what to do, but he was explaining why you're doing it, like what you're achieving. I noticed that repeatedly. Was like, hey, this is what's going to happen to the cornerback when you do this. This is why you're executing this, specific drill or move, whatever you would call it. And I thought that was interesting. So yeah, he was an active participant, and
he runs really good routes. I noticed that too, watching him teach. He was very physically engaged. He runs great routes, and I was impressed by that.
Yeah. So no, but that group though, it just very much captures your attention, right? Because I think that the reading between the lines later about Malik McClain from James Franklin, it was fairly clear to me, I would say, that there's progress to be made, right? There's a gap between where he is and where they would need him to be like an instant impact kind of like big time guy. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like I'm not saying that he can't contribute or that he won't have a role this season. I'm just saying, is he going to step in and displace Keandre? No. I thought that was fairly clear, last night.
One thing I noticed is that if you're watching here on YouTube, running contested catch situations, an area where I think this team really needs to take a step forward from the receiver position, is catching the ball in contested situations and breaking tackles. And he was really getting into how to do it, why you do it, and then making them do it in those kind of uncomfortable situations of catching the ball in a tight space. That's an immediate difference for me. There's some drills that we saw yesterday that I have never seen before. Doesn't mean they don't do it when we're not there, but they're pretty good into their routine. Anything else from the offense? I don't know who else you were talking to or looking at. Did you have a chance to look at the tight ends or the offensive line at all?
No, it was mostly the receivers.
Mostly the receivers. Okay.
I watched the quarterbacks. I thought it was interesting. Franklin said at one point, and look, like, again, these are a bunch of things that I guess you would expect to a certain extent, but talking about running through the line of scrimmage for the quarterbacks to work on their conditioning. Like I thought that was just, hey, sprint, right? Like you're not carrying the ball, but on that bootleg kind of fake thing that they were doing, you sprint through the line of scrimmage. But other than that, it remains the 15 minutes in which we will try to extrapolate all of the things that we can possibly extrapolate, but I pretty much watched the receivers.
Yeah. I got a chance to check out the offensive line. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com in the notes from yesterday if you want to get more information about that. Some guys looked good, but I'll let you see that over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Fitz, with the defense as usual, were there any things you picked out that you want to highlight here that you thought were interesting?
I think just numbers jump out. You feel pretty confident about the first two groups of defensive linemen. There's a little bit of a drop off. You get to the third group, which is natural, but that they seem to have many guys in place, with the exception of Keziah Izzard, who I don't think we're going to see much of this spring. At linebacker, not so much the case. Tyler Elston, again, not out there. And when you've only got 8 scholarship linebackers right now, that's going to cut into that, and it's going to be more noticeable. I still think the safeties are the story here. Like it's you lose Jair Brown, very big loss, undoubtedly very big loss. But these 4 guys can play, and I think they're all going to play a lot. Like when we get to the season, you're going to see fairly even snap counts. I'll be honest with you, Jalen Reed. I didn't expect to see as much of Jalen Reed this spring as we have so far. He had the surgery after the Rose Bowl, of course, missed part of the Rose Bowl. But I'm curious if part of that goes back to like, if he doesn't practice, is he going to lose his spot? Because the Key Wheatley and KJ Winston are really good. Like I think they're going to be terrific and like legitimately challenged for the starting spot. And as I said, all four of those guys will play, but like that's a highly contested position right there. And even after losing Tig, I think it's still in a good spot. So I don't see too much. I mean, it was contested catches on the defense, all the transition drills, the turnover drills, and things like that. So we're not seeing a whole lot there, but just taking account of all those position groups, that's kind of what jumps out to me.
I got to see the linebackers for just a little bit doing some of those drills, and boy, does Tony Rojas look good. It's something I wanted to ask James Franklin, because my thought was, coming from defensive end, not doing any of the stuff you're seeing him do now might not be natural to him. But you look at him and Tamir Robinson here on the YouTube channel, Tony looks supernatural. Like, he looks very fluid in space. So, from drill to transitioning that to the actual practice, one of the things I'm curious about is, how does that transition work from a guy that is not a safety converting to linebacker in college? He's a defensive end, and primarily those guys have gone to will linebacker, not out into the field. So just a general curiosity about, I think everyone's wondering, is Tony Rojas going to be a part of the conversation this year? And what position is he starting from? So I thought that was an interesting place for the defense, outside of the obvious places of Abdul Carter, who looks awesome. Fitz, when you were around him, have you gotten used to it yet?
Kind of. I mean, he's a big guy. I mean, I'm a big guy, so these guys don't jump out as much to me, but like, it's noticeable. Like, we saw that video the other day. He looks like a pro that is like snuck his way into Penn State's practice. Like, that's how he looks physically, and obviously moves really well, does all the things that we have seen him do so far. It's just, it's when you take a look at the difference between a good college linebacker and a pro, like a legitimate pro high level prospect, like first, second day NFL draft, that's what it is. Like, and Penn State has started to recruit that way. We talk about getting bigger, and I think that's a very simple conversation. It's way too simplified in terms of what they're looking for. But like, guys like Abdul Carter, guys like Dennis Sutton, guards like Birchmeyer and the Dunca, the guys that they brought in that they're just physically bigger, and you notice those guys right off the bat. And I think that's really what I take away from when I see Abdul Carter, because Tamir Robinson is a big kid. Like, he is 6'3", maybe a shade over 6'3", probably 240 right now, 235, something like that. And he fills out that there's no question that they're going to have a decision to make about linebacker edge, like, because he's so big, he's so naturally big. Abdul is bigger than him, but like, you don't have those questions because you see him move around, and it's just a different speed, different size. So I think that's really what you take away when you watch Abdul Carter, because there's still so much development left in him to tap into. Like, that's the exciting part, but to do it at that size, like you look at, I know Alabama's coming out of the combine, some of Alabama's numbers were a bit inflated, but they're bigger guys that can move at a different level, playing at a position above in that hierarchy that we talk about. They've got guys that are defensive end size playing middle linebacker. Like, that's not an accident. That's the way that they do things. So I think Penn State's trying to move in that manner. You're only going to get a couple of those guys per class, but you continue to try. When James Franklin says not sacrificing size for athleticism, you're trying to get both. And I think that's where it comes out with a guy like Abdul Carter.
Just in case we don't have Nate here later in the show, because we are on Coach Watch, and because Fitz and I have generally no interest in the actual conversation here, David Greeter gives us a super chat: oven beef and noodles over beef and rice. I don't know that I know what oven beef and noodles is. Is that beef stroganoff? Secondly, and most importantly, is there any news division pods development on how Penn State will schedule going forward to the Big Ten? Nate, have you heard anything about this? Is there any update here?
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I'll just be honest. Like, if that happened, I did not see it. There hasn't really been any conversation to that end that I've noticed anyway.
Yeah, I mean, going away from divisions, right? Just I think it's more about the protected rivalries at this point. So I mean, I think they've realized what a disaster divisions is from a balance perspective, and you can't like forecast that stuff 10 years out. Like maybe Nebraska is really good again in 10 years. You can't really play that role and split that up. I mean, I guess you can try it geographically, but still, like it's going to rotate around Ohio State and Michigan. That's what this conference is. I mean, let's just be honest. So I think you get away from divisions, you figure out the way to protect those rivalries, and then go from there. Because I think opening it up helps your entire like premise as a conference, right? Like to make that easier for your guys to get into the playoff. That's what you're aiming for.
Really, the thing we should take away from this conversation is that we need to step up some of the questions in the chat if we want to get a good mailbag. So submit those now. We'll be getting that in just a few minutes. Thanks to David for updating on that situation and for the donation. If you want to get into the mailbag, drop a question in the chat. We've got a couple ready to go, but we want to hear from you as well. That brings us to our new segment where we break down something James Franklin said and we comment on it, whether it's kind of reading between the lines or just discussing something important he said. That's next. So Nate kind of hit on this earlier. We're going to skip over the conversation about the wide receivers because that third wide receiver position and how that has gone, we got to that earlier today. This one was the one where I was like, okay, I need some context. I need my experts here to tell me what's James Franklin talking about. He was asked about Khalil Dinkins and the depth tight ends standing out, who has played well, how have they done so far? And this is his response, which very shortly stops talking about Khalil Dinkins as far as I can tell.
To your point, when you guys asked earlier about a guy that's standing out, Khalil, I think, would fall into that category. He's been really good. But one of the things I talked to the guys about is, one of the things I believe in, and sometimes these guys don't understand because this is the only place they've ever been, so they don't know, but like everybody's getting a ton of reps. And that doesn't happen everywhere. A lot of times, even in spring ball, not everybody's getting reps. And same thing in training camp. Everybody's getting reps. And then some of these guys are getting a ton of reps because there's injuries. And then they either don't know what they're doing or they want to be dramatic about the amount of reps they're getting. And nobody cares. This isn't high school anymore. Nobody cares. Get the job done. And then on top of that, these are the same guys that during the fall are going to be complaining that they're not getting reps. They got the reps right now. They need to take advantage of them and show everybody that they got a chance to compete here at a high level. And that's kind of the adjustment right now for a lot of the mid-semester guys, but really also a lot of the freshmen last year that may not have played a bunch. They got to understand what they have to do and how they have to compete at this level to be successful day in and day out.
So is that he sounds a little hoarse there. I don't know if it's spring allergies or if that was what he was yelling at the team after practice before he came to see us. Nate, what do you take away from that conversation?
Look, that's what he does. It's messaging, right? It's, hey, whoever had that conversation with me on the team kind of complaining or wasn't happy with how things were going this spring or had an issue with how things were going last year. Because look, he talked about that in November, right? I remember one of the Wednesday press conferences, he talked about how I actually asked him in one of the rare questions that I ask during a press conference. I asked him about how the red shirts were coming along and whether or not there was ever like what the response is of those players, right? As a guy who's going through a red shirt and has to debate whether or not to take it off late in the season. And he brought up the point. He said, look, like the conversation changes pretty dramatically where everybody at the beginning of the season in the true freshman class wants to play. And then they realize that their opportunities are limited, and over the season, the tone changes. They don't want to lose their red shirt, to lose their eligibility by just being a role player, by just being a guy who excels on special teams, for instance, right? Like that's not how guys want to spend that first year, but they don't make that clear until late in the season. But the underside of that is yeah, there's a lot of gripes. There's a lot of unhappy guys on the front side of the season when they're going through that process because they want to be playing. And so I thought that last night's comments were a little bit of an addendum to that, right? It's the bookend on that comment saying, okay, well, that happened last year. That was your stance last year. Now you got it. Now you're over here, and we're going to give you a bajillion reps this spring. You need to take advantage of that. You need to be, not just happy with it, but you should be thriving. So you can't have it both ways. And, I just, it's an interesting dynamic for him to play with, but certainly putting the message out there to anybody who feels that way, like, hey, this is how it's got to be. Otherwise you're not suited for this grind, like for what Penn State football is supposed to be.
So kind of jogging my memory here, and maybe we don't want to bring up the players that speculate on who he might be talking about, but a guy on the reverse that we have seen them praise for a lot of the things that you just described, Nate. Fitz, is that why Cam Miller comes up so much? A guy who has committed to being as good as he can on special teams, got some reps last year in kind of cleanup situations. Outside of his talent and the excitement about him playing corner, also, is it the buy-in that they also want to then prop up as an example for young guys of, if you're going to be here, we want you to be grinding behind the scenes like Cam Miller?
Yeah, and it's understanding the importance of things like special teams, and Cam Miller kind of latched onto that because he wasn't going to play at corner last year, and I think he'd be the first to tell you that. And he saw the opportunity there, with those guys, with Joey Porter leaving, gives you an opportunity to step in and be that fourth guy. That fourth guy has a lot of value and is going to get a lot of reps and is going to be on the practice field a lot, with Kalen King and Storm Duck and Johnny Dixon. So I think that's what plays into it. It's very interesting going back to what Nate said, is these guys are such big fish. Like, even the guys that we rate at the bottom of the class, that we say this kid needs a year or two, maybe even more, to get ready to actually step on a Big Ten field, they don't feel that way, and they shouldn't. That's part of why they've gotten to where they've gotten in the first place. And it's hard. You see, some guys don't make it. Malik McNeil didn't make it through the first year. Nate Bruce made it through 2 practices. It's very hard to get past that. And for James Franklin to go into that, talking about tight ends, I think it's a very interesting scenario here, because we joke about the third tight end being a hotly contested thing, and the audience for that is a little bit smaller than when we're talking quarterbacks. But it is very important, because you've got Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren, both of whom are battling injuries and not in the lineup right now. So a giant opportunity for Khalil Dinkins, for Jerry Cross, maybe for Joey Schlaffer. You've got these guys that haven't really been fully accustomed to what it takes to be a starter, getting starters reps or getting first and second team reps. That's such a big jump. And I don't know that you can grasp that fully at times. And I think that's an interesting thing there, because at the end of the tunnel, when Theo and Tyler are back, those guys are going to be your starters. So it'll be really interesting to see how Khalil Dinkins, what he makes of this opportunity for him, because it sounds like he's doing a really good job of it. What he does when he goes back to being the third guy, that's the little things that you're trying to pick up. And you said it before, messaging, testing guys, getting the guys to be frustrated and uncomfortable, because that helps them grow. I think that's all part of this right now. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the spring, especially for guys that aren't used to getting reps, and now they're getting a lot of reps.
We'll get into our next question, and there might be less to talk about this because we do such a great job of covering things like this that are under the radar. James Franklin talking about the analyst roles after all the coaching changes in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we haven't filled all the positions. We've lost some guys that we haven't filled yet, and typically they would have been filled, but my focus was on hiring a D-line coach that went longer than anticipated. So we still have some positions open, and then we also have some flexibility just based on the guys that we hire and what their contract situation is like. So we could add a few more. We'll see how that plays out. There's some guys that we're in conversations with, some guys that we're going to invite up to spring ball, some guys that we're waiting to see if they were going to get picked up and hired in the NFL, or so on and so forth. So there could be a few more guys still added to the roster. And then in terms of what they are able to do, it's all the behind the scenes stuff. And then it's hard for me to answer that question specifically because, it's not like, you lose someone and you take that next person and just plug them in. It's based on their experience. So like what Wiz was able to do and what Coach Rocco was able to do was based on their experience as head coaches as well as defensive or offensive coaches.
So what is your, I don't know, level of concern or the fact they don't have a full analyst staff? Is that a concern this late into as you mentioned, the middle third of spring practice, Fitz? Is that something you would be concerned about?
No, I mean, they've still got a ton of analysts. I mean, let's not make them out to be the poor kid on the block here. Like, it's kind of how the staff has grown. And it's, do you have 10 analysts anymore? No. If you have 8 analysts, yeah, that's fine. So I think that's okay. You lose Ken Wisenhunt, which obviously, that's a sounding board that you can't really find anywhere else. Former NFL head coach and a successful one at that. So that's tough to deal with. Danny Rocco is now a head coach. So you've had some guys, those trusted members of the circle, while you don't hear their name on Saturdays and things like that, very difficult to replace. They've brought in a couple of different guys. Charlie Fry left as well. So you did have some turnover, and that's what you should expect when you're following analyst positions. That's what you absolutely should expect, because those guys are looking to get back into it. Yes, Frank Leonard is still around. You're looking to get back into it. So, I mean, it's kind of the natural circle of progression there. You brought Dion on to be that guy, that sounding board for John Scott. Now all of a sudden you had some changes there. So you've got to make that work and figure out a different defensive guy. It's funny. He was talking about, sounding or feeling out guys, bringing them in during the spring. You can bring guys in for a week or two, spend time around the team. I know Kevin Reiner, who just joined the Notre Dame staff as an analyst, was up working with them through bowl season. Like that happens. Guys that don't get the full-time analyst gigs can still come up and, be a sounding board, provide input, do whatever they want, maybe on a volunteer basis. A guy that I'm looking at, and I'm going to go to this well every time he's available, is Ola Adams, who was with the Denver Broncos, used to be with Villanova. I still think that he's very much in play for being a future member of the staff if they can make the timing work. There's some whispers that he might end up at Maryland. So there's a lot of guys that are in flux right now. As college coaches continue to go to the NFL, as NFL coaches continue to be let go for other NFL coaches, there's no shortage of college, or there's no shortage of available analysts here. Let's be honest with ourselves, because this is the way that college football has gone. This is the way these staffs keep growing. And even though college coaches are all going to the NFL because they want the lifestyle change and things like that, there's still a lot of people that coach football that can still work their way back into it. It's a recycle of sorts. It's a business that's, there's a lot of, I don't want to say back scratching, but a lot of guys know a lot of guys, and this is
it's also small, right? Yeah. So it's not like there's an expansive, you aren't graduating new coaches every year from university with a bachelor's degree. It is a very small community compared to maybe other sectors of, if you look at it as an economy thing, like, there aren't as many there aren't as many coaches as there are engineers in the world.
Yeah, and that's what you're not looking for guys that are going out and motivating you on the field. You're looking for engineers. You're looking for guys that can figure out the why and the how, then put it into perspective for the guys that can make it work out on the field. So that's what they're doing. And as they continue to open up roles for analysts across college football, in terms of open up what they can do and how much they can work with players and the other coaches and things like that, then you're going to continue to see those roles grow. Whereas, Deion Barnes would have had to go to Miami, Ohio and be a defensive line coach, or Akron or something like that, before he may have come back around. Now that's not necessarily the case. They got him an analyst job, and now all of a sudden turned it into a defensive line job, probably quicker than anticipated. But that's kind of how it works these days. You're kind of feeling out these guys that that you trust, and bringing them in as sounding boards.
Steven says, really interesting press conference. Thanks for breaking it down today. I personally enjoy our new segment Between the Lines, so thank you for saying that, Steven. I think it's super valuable. We're going to keep doing it as long as James Franklin keeps talking. Or in case I get outvoted, which is always possible. This is not a dictatorship. This is indeed a democracy. So that's it for today on Between the Lines. We have to get... What?
Fitz, did you say Kevin was at Notre Dame? Was that...
Yeah,
did I catch
he
that
just
right?
did a good job at Notre Dame this week.
Oh, that's interesting. Does he know people there, or like what's his relationships like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he does. He was the offensive coordinator at Old Dominion, so like that's going to give some clout. He's still, a fairly young guy, and I'm just gonna throw a barb. He looks older than he is,
Sure.
but yeah, he knows some people, and I think he was considered for a role here. But like, there's different places that you go to learn, and I guess he's got some people at Notre Dame. I haven't talked to him. I sent him a message.
Are you
the other day
fishing for
congratulating him.
sources?
Fitz,
Nate, are you fishing for sources?
It was a good joke that you just didn't pick up on.
I'm very, very good at jokes. You know that.
Notre Dame, the school. Micah, never mind.
It was
Anyway.
it was a Penn State basketball joke, so it might have flown under the radar.
Tip your bartenders and waitresses. I'll be here all week.
All right. Well, we're going to be here for another few minutes because we got to get to the BWI mailbag. We're going to get a quick update on Mike, who we said at the start of the show was driving to a sales call. Turns out he told us he has a Tesla, so he's not driving, so there's a good thing. He also is here with a mailbag question. Do you think that the staff will shy away from playing Aller and Prabula next year in a 2 QB system because of the QB numbers? This is something James Franklin floated at the beginning of the spring practice season. Nate, I want to come to you quickly. Any basketball news first, and then answer Mike's question if you have a thought on it.
Yeah, no basketball, and I don't know. That's a good question. I think I haven't really thought about it. I haven't asked anybody. Right? Like, would you? I don't think he likes 2 quarterback systems anyway. Yeah. I don't think that's.
What do you consider a 2 quarterback system? Like, are we talking the Wildcat becomes a 2 quarterback system, or we're talking alternating drives? Because I think they're very different things.
Yeah, I think the like Tommy Stevens, Will Levis situation won't exist. I would put it that way, right? Like, are you gonna put Bo Prabula on the field just to get him on the field as a tight end, or in some unconventional role? That would surprise me. I don't Fitz. I'd be curious to know your take, but I don't really see that happening.
I think they would do it. To be honest with you, like,
what?
I think you like not like as a huge like part of the package, but like to have that in your tool belt. And I know Penn State fans hate it because the way that it went with, I think, Tommy, it started really great and then it didn't. It was really good until it wasn't.
Yeah.
But I think that they feel that Bo gives them an opportunity to like throw the ball, like and this is not a situation where you see Drew come to the sideline. I mean, you see Drew split out wide. Just make them account for something. I think that's what it comes down to, is make them account for Prabula and what you can do. It's kind of like the T formation. Like, once you figure out like the different ways to work around it, it becomes a necessary part of your offense. It's not your every down thing. It's not a big part of what you do from a drive to drive basis, but I think there's a spot for it. And like I said, I know Penn State fans will not like to hear that, but I think that they're very wary of today's college football in the sense that Bo, if he doesn't play, like, I know he's grew up Penn State fan, wants to be a Penn State guy and all that kind of stuff, but like, get him some action, get him in there. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go to this thing against Ohio State, against Michigan, but it can be a part of your playbook. You got a 12-game regular season. You can make it work. You can figure out a way to make it work. And, you say 2 quarterback system. To me, that goes back to the sense of playing both of those guys, not an equal amount of time, but a decent amount of time. They don't want to do that. They don't want to have 2 quarterbacks. They want to have 1 quarterback. They want to have maybe a complementary guy that can change some things up for you every once in a while. So I don't see them moving in that direction. But yeah, I think we talk about guys that aren't going to play a ton, but they can carve out a role. Everybody has a role. You make that your role and you excel at it. And I think Bo is a guy that can excel. Like, again, every time he comes up, people say Penn State staff is just telling us what we want to hear because they want to keep him around from the transfer portal. I think the kid is good. Like, you've heard the stuff. You've talked to people in that program. There's something to this kid that is legitimate. And I'm excited to see what that is, whether that's against Toledo, whether that's against Ohio State. I don't know. It's very much somewhere in between there. So I think it's possible, but not in a 2-quarterback system. They want Drew, or they want one guy to be the starter. I think they want Drew to be the starter in the sense that that's how that makes your program look a lot better. And if he's clearly above the other guy, that's an obvious decision. But yeah, I think that's the way to go for that. I think you can make it work. You have trouble with it, you go away from it. We'll see what happens with Mike Yurcich's thought process there. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not trying to figure out the best ways to score points. And I think that's a way that they can score points.
Sorry, I was sitting here drawing up plays for Bo Pribula as an option quarterback. Yeah, I mean, it opens you options. So let's take a couple of situations just randomly that I was thinking about. Sean Clifford struggled times with a rolling pocket, where they would roll the pocket, he would stop and throw. What if, instead of having a rolling pocket, you have a guy that is going on a sweep action that's Bo Pribula? So you hand the ball off, it looks like a sweep play, all of a sudden it's a pass. He's a quarterback that can run. So you've got that option. That's just a free one for Mike Yurcich if he wants it. But yeah, there's different ways you can get the quarterback involved if he has the athleticism and the maturity and the intangibles that Pribula has, from everything we've heard, to make good decisions in that moment. Because that's one of the keys about Bo Pribula, quick decision making, and he's right a lot. That's that kind of it factor thing. Fitz, I want you to pick the next question because I know that we've got a couple here, and I want this one to come to you. So which one do you want to answer here?
Oh, I don't have that open right now.
Oh, sorry.
Let's see. With new position coaches, which group is under the most pressure to deliver this season, the wide receivers or the defensive tackles? You got a graphic for that one, or are we just going to go?
I did not cut that one. So yeah,
perfect.
We'll just go with that one.
We got a seamless live show here. It's fantastic. No. So position coaches, who's under the most pressure? I would say wide receivers, just because that's a little bit more under the spotlight. Defensive tackle, again, is not going to be a strength. And like, regardless, if you go pull a guy out of the portal, it's going to be very tough for that group to be better than it's been in the past, but it can still be okay. I think the level of volatility is higher with receivers in terms of the drops, the things that we've seen in the past, developing a number one receiver. What happens when Dante Cephas get here? I think there's just so many questions there, and that needle can move all over the place. So I think that there's a little bit more pressure. And also, you're breaking in a 5-star quarterback. I think that has something to do with it. Like, you need those guys to support your 5-star quarterback to make your offense go. You've got this window where you think you can be really good. A lot of that's going to depend on the offense. So I would say receiver here, just because I think that can take it to another level. I think the defensive tackles are going to be what they are. But I think that the receivers, if they top out their potential, can be very good. We talked about Keandre Lambert-Smith. I will say, I kind of got left out of this conversation earlier, but it was very interesting to me that he mentioned Keandre and Trey Wallace as your two guys right now. And then there seems to be a drop off. Malik McClain, there was high hopes because of the athleticism, because the attitude when he came and all that kind of stuff. Does not seem like he's there, kind of going back to the initial expectations that we had for him, that maybe it takes a little bit longer for him to get into that. And then what happens after that with Amari Evans, with those slot guys in Liam Clifford, Caden Saunders, some of the younger guys. So like, I think that there's a distinct break there. Of course, Dante Cephas can help you out a lot with that, can join that top tier of receivers almost immediately. But I think that's where the pressure is, because you look at the teams around the country that make the playoff, that win those playoff games. They have elite receivers. Penn State doesn't have elite receivers right now, but can they take that big step up? I think that's possible. So a lot's on Marcus Higgins, because so much goes through those guys. And to be honest with you, we see it so much more. Like, we see it from a play-to-play basis when you're throwing the football. This is just going to be a lot more pressure. We saw the defensive tackles against Michigan. You didn't notice them as much, as much as you would notice mistakes by receivers in other games.
Yeah. Beach Wine Guy, back again. He did not like my idea of using Bo Pribula in a package. He says, don't make Pribula the next Stevens or Levis. Every time he goes in, he's running it because everyone knows in the stadium knows it. 2020, I will say, was very different. That was a very different season. That was a very different offense than what they did.
Single wing, yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
I mean,
they're like, we're just going to sledgehammer this way through the rest of the season. We're not going to try and be creative or advance the football other than literally trying to get 3 yards at a time.
But think about this. How much time are we spending talking about this? Like it's something that's going to come up. Well, how much time is somebody going to have to prepare for this? Like Bo Prabula, you kind of have the construct of what Drew is in terms of quarterback, and Drew can run too. Like let's be honest. He can get you the yards that you need. Not necessarily going to break off the 60-yarder, but Bo has the dual threat reputation. I know Mike Yurcich played that down last night. But like they know that there is the element of that word threat. Like he is a threat to do things in different levels. And it's harder to defend a quarterback like that. And you need to take more time, and you need to use your film time, your practice time, your things like that to account for that. Because when you have a quarterback like Drew, who you expect to be a statue because of the stereotype of him being 6'5" and having the big arm and everything like that, when you diversify what you have to prepare for, it takes time away from the other guy. And that's where it makes sense to me.
The next question here is something that I've been thinking about, and another one here, like you said earlier, this is a live show, so I'm throwing this one in here as a wild card. I've got a question from the mailbag on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, a great way to get here on the mailbag. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, once again, sign up now, $29.99 from now to the beginning of the season. You get on the mailbag thread, it's easier to get here on the show. We are taking questions in the chat, by the way, so a couple more minutes here, probably one more question from the chat. Is there anyone on the current roster that plays the role of Deebo Samuel, Curtis Samuel, as a bigger body receiver that can play certain running back plays? I don't think so, and I don't think that's where the offense is going, but I do think, Nate, this is something that we talked about after practice, is I don't think it's a coincidence that Marcus Hagans was working with the outside receivers. He's working with the X's and the Z's. Those big-bodied guys, and I'm trying not to go too much into my prior evidence, but trying to build a picture of what Marcus Hagans is as a coach, what he coaches, and what he looks for. When we talked about him at Virginia, a lot of big-bodied guys, a lot of physical receivers, and then he's going through a contested catch drill the first time we see him. These are just the notes I'm taking in my head. So I think if there is a guy, coming to the question we got here of, is there a wide receiver breakout before Dante Cephas arrives this summer? I think that this is the opportunity for a big-body receiver to get the attention of the new coach and to make a play. So even Malik Mega, he's got to catch the football, obviously, but like there is this opportunity for guys to take a step if they are more to the liking of the new coach. And to me, what I see is working with the big guys, working with the physical receivers on the outside, which is something I think they sorely needed in this offense last year. Nate, is that, do you think that's fair, or am I reading 2 or 3 lines too deep on this? Because that is also reality.
No, I mean, I'm fine with the line of thinking. I think Malik is interesting just because clearly he's not, in the minds of the staff, a lost cause, right? I think certainly they have found value for him on special teams, but it remains a fundamental proposition of, hey, this guy is physically impressive, right? That was even, man, my memory now, 2 preseasons ago or last preseason, but I mean, he was kind of a buzzy guy of, hey, man, this guy, like, he's just a freak. He just looks huge. He looks great. And he is able to put himself in a position to make plays, and then just the consistency in his career has not been there catching the football. Can it be? I don't know. Right. I don't know. Right. I think that's, the jury is still out on that, but certainly I do think that what you're suggesting about the fresh eyes of a new coach would be particularly helpful to a guy like him, because you've got a fresh start. You've got a person who doesn't have necessarily the baggage of remembering all of your mistakes, right? And having those mistakes be an outsized presence in the perception of you, right? Yep. So that it's an interesting thought. I just, we'll just have to see. I mean, he'll have to do it, right? Because you still have to do it in front of James Franklin, and it's going to take I would assume a hefty amount of evidence to say, like, hey, this is like, that that prior me is gone.
Yeah.
I'm now super reliable.
I guess in the terms of if there's a guy that does break out, I think it's going to be one of those outside receivers. That's kind of my thought process, and the room opens up a little bit. That's all. I want to make sure you guys get the final word, though. Fitz, anything else you want to go? We running out of time here on the show. Any last thoughts about that, or anything we touched on that you want to clean up here at the end?
I like the running backs that they have for the running back role. I mean, this is not the 49ers situation where you're just trying to get to your guy. And by the way, it's a year too late because Parker Washington was that guy if you were going to find that guy, like the stout. But anyway, I agree. I will say Malik Mega's been at the front of the drills all spring. As Nate mentioned, definitely not a lot lost cause. He's going to have to catch the ball consistently. He's going to have to buck the trend and shake the memories that Franklin and the people that have been around have of him in terms of not catching the ball consistently. But fresh eyes never hurt anybody. So I'm excited to see him take that role. And he's really settled into that special teams role really well. So like that, and that's another thing to take out of it is he's been coachable. He's been a guy that has accepted his role and excelled at his role. Just hasn't been catching the football. So we'll see with that. Trey Wallace, I think probably a little bit ahead of where we forecasted. We were talking about him in that McLean role or in that McLean battle right there for the third guy for when Cephas arrives. So I think that Wallace has probably been the guy that's broken out so far, but you don't think of that because he is one of those original guys that we talked about at the beginning of the depth chart. I'll be very interested to see in the slot what happens there with Clifford, with Saunders, maybe Amari Evans in there as well. So we'll see very much a we'll see process with that group as they try to find four guys for that rotation. Cephas is very good. Does that bump Keandre Lambert-Smith? There's just a lot of questions. And going back to the mailbag question about having the pressure, you're going to have the pressure to find the right guys and then to get those guys to perform. That's a lot. And I think that's one reason it's so important, especially when you've got a quarterback situation like you think you have the talented guy, the most talented guy getting it out there. So I don't know. That's just my closing thoughts on that. I'm not sure that they're looking to change up and do some things like that drastic. But make it with what you got. And maybe Nick Singleton's that guy that's your receiver that you're giving the ball as a running back. And I think Penn State fans will be happy with the outcome of that one.
Yeah, for sure. That'll do it today for the BWI live show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. What we've seen from practice, that's what we've seen for this week until next week. But that doesn't mean that it's over because our guys here, they get inside access. They get information throughout the weekend. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Sign up now and like the video, like all our things, like the podcast version. We're getting out of here. We will talk to you next week.